What if the person you were forced to marry by contract ended up being the only one who could truly destroy you or save you? The rain that night was relentless, soaking through the marble steps of the Han family estate as if the sky itself mourned the bargain being sealed inside. Beneath the warm amber lights of the grand hall, a young woman stood still, her ivory dress clinging to her skin, her bouquet trembling in her hands. She didn't cry. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Her name was Essio Hannah, 26 years old, the daughter of a once powerful conglomerate, now drowning in debt and scandal. The groom Han Jae-min stood across from her, immaculate in his tailored suit, the kind of man whose eyes never gave away what he was thinking. He didn't smile when he said "I do." He didn't even look at her. The contract between their families was simple and cruel. 3 years of marriage, no love, no divorce, no scandal. In exchange, Hannah's father's company would survive. When the term ended, both would go their separate ways as if the union had never existed. No one expected love. In fact, the contract explicitly forbade it. The ink was still wet when Hannah realized how deeply she'd been sold. That first night, she moved through the house like a ghost, every room too silent, every step echoing. It was a mansion made of glass and gold, but it felt like a cage. Jamin disappeared into his study after dinner, leaving her alone with the ticking of the clock and the faint sound of thunder outside. On the table between them during that meal sat a single envelope, her copy of the contract. Its words burned in her mind: no interference in each other's personal affairs, no public displays of affection, no expectation of intimacy. To anyone else, it might have read like a shield. To her, it was a sentence. The next morning, she awoke to find the bed beside her still untouched. His side was perfectly made, the pillow untouched, as though he'd never been there. For the first few weeks, they barely spoke. Their lives orbited around each other like two cold stars, close enough to share a roof, but too distant to touch. But sometimes, she'd catch him watching her, not with desire or anger, but something quieter, something unreadable. The first real fracture in their silence came one evening when she found him standing in the rain, shirt sleeves rolled up, trying to fix a fallen trellis in the garden. The wind howled, the rain cut sideways, but he stayed there, his hands muddy, his expression calm. She ran out with an umbrella, shouting over the storm, "You'll catch a cold," she said, half angry, half worried. He looked up, rainwater streaming down his face, and said simply, "It's just water." That was it, that was all. But something shifted. After that, there were small things. He started leaving coffee for her on the kitchen counter before heading to work. She noticed the way he stopped closing his study door all the way, as if silently inviting her to walk in. And one night she did. He was sitting in front of an old record player, the sound of a worn-out jazz vinyl filling the room. Papers lay scattered across his desk, financial reports, contracts, and a small photograph she hadn't noticed before. It was of a young boy, standing in front of a hospital. Jamin saw her glance at it, and for the first time, his composure cracked. "My brother," he said quietly. "He died 5 years ago." She didn't ask more, and he didn't explain. But from that moment, she understood. His silence wasn't cruelty, it was armor. The days that followed were marked by a strange rhythm, moments of quiet companionship interrupted by reminders of what their marriage really was. At charity events, they walked side by side, smiled for the cameras, played the perfect couple. But behind closed doors, they retreated to their separate corners, each one pretending not to feel the growing pull between them. It was around then that the whispers began. Someone leaked photos to the press, rumors that Hannah had been seen meeting an ex-boyfriend, that she'd married Jamin only to gain control of his company shares. She found herself on the front page of every tabloid. Jamin said nothing. For days, he acted as if he hadn't seen the headlines. Then, one night, she came home to find him waiting for her in the darkened living room. The only light came from the city skyline bleeding through the glass windows. "Is it true?" he asked. His voice was calm, but she could hear the strain beneath it. "No," she said, her voice shaking. "You know it's not." He stared at her for a long moment, then looked away. "It doesn't matter. The board doesn't care about truth." She wanted to scream at him, to break through that icy calm, to make him feel something. But she didn't. Instead, she turned away, whispering, "You're the one who said feelings don't matter." For the first time, he flinched. The next morning, she was gone. No one saw her leave. But the house felt different without her. The silence heavier, sharper. It was as though her absence revealed what had been missing all along. For 2 days, Jamin went about his schedule like a machine, but his focus was fractured. He found himself staring at the empty chair across the breakfast table, the untouched mug she used. On the third night, a storm rolled in again, almost identical to the one on their wedding night. He was in his car, driving through the sheets of rain, when he saw her, standing outside a small cafe, her umbrella broken, her hair plastered to her face. He pulled over before he could think. She looked up as his headlights cut through the rain. Their eyes met through the glass. When she stepped inside the car, she was shivering, her fingers cold. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then she said, "I was thinking of breaking the contract." His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Why?" "Because I can't do this halfway anymore," she whispered. "Either it ends, or it has to mean something." He didn't answer. The rain hammered the car roof, drowning out the sound of their breathing. When he finally looked at her, there was something raw in his expressions, something the polished air had never shown anyone. "What if I don't want it to end?" he said quietly. The words hung between them, fragile and trembling like glass. Back at the house, she walked ahead of him through the dark hallway. He stopped her at the base of the stairs, his voice low, rough. "I never wanted a contract," he said. "It was supposed to protect us both, but I didn't realize how much it would cost." She turned, eyes searching his. "And what does it cost now?" He stepped closer. The air between them seemed to hum. "Everything if I let you go." It was the first time he'd said anything that sounded like confession. That night, the mansion was no longer a cage. It was quiet, but alive with unspoken words, with the hum of something just beginning. In the days that followed, they began to unlearn the rules they'd been bound by. He'd walk her to the car in the mornings. She'd bring him coffee at midnight when he worked too late. There were no declarations, no grand gestures, just the slow thawing of two hearts that had been locked away too long. And yet, happiness in their world was always temporary. A week later, Hannah received a call from an unknown number. When she answered, a voice on the other end whispered something that turned her blood cold. "If you stay with him, he'll lose everything." She froze. "Who is this?" The line went dead. Later that night, she found a document slipped under her door, photocopies of secret transactions. Signatures she recognized as her father's, Jamin's, hidden dealings that tied both families together far deeper than the contract had revealed. It wasn't just a marriage of convenience, it was a cover-up. Her hands trembled as she realized the truth. Someone was trying to destroy them, and she didn't know whether Jamin was her shield or her enemy. Outside, the rain began again, faint and rhythmic against the glass. She turned toward the window, the city lights flickering like distant stars, her reflection staring back at her, half in shadow, half in light. For the first time, she wondered if the man she was falling in love with was the same man who'd built her prison. And somewhere in the house, behind the closed study door, Jamin's phone buzzed with a message that made him go pale. It was from the same unknown number. Only 3 words. "She knows everything." The rain kept falling. The silence between them deepened, and the contract that once protected them was about to destroy them both. The message glowed on his phone like a warning flare in the dark. "She knows everything." Jamin stared at it for a long time, the rain outside tapping softly against the windows, the clock ticking past midnight. His reflection in the glass looked like that of a stranger, pale, drawn, haunted by something he couldn't outrun. He didn't move at first, didn't breathe. Then slowly, he turned off the screen and slipped the phone into his pocket, as though burying the evidence could make the truth vanish. But it was too late. He could feel it, the shift in the air, the unraveling of the fragile trust they'd built. Down the hall, Hannah stood by the window in their bedroom, the folder of documents clutched to her chest. Her heart pounded like it was trying to break free. The ink on those pages carried more than secrets, it carried betrayal. She read the same lines again and again, her father's signature beside Jamin's, dates, payments, acquisitions, each line linking the two men in a web of deception she didn't fully understand. The contract marriage had never been about her. She was just a pawn moved into position to silence scandal, to merge to collapsing empires under one facade of unity. A knock sounded at the door. She didn't answer, but the door opened anyway. Jamin stood there, rain still dripping from his coat, his eyes shadowed and unreadable. For a moment, they just looked at each other, the silence between them heavy, filled with everything neither could yet say. "Where did you get those?" he asked quietly, nodding toward the papers. She tightened her grip. You knew his jaw clenched. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." Her voice trembled, though she tried to steady it. "Tell me why my father's signature is next to yours on documents that were never meant to exist. Tell me why I'm the last one to find out that my marriage, my entire life, was built on a lie." He stepped forward, but she moved back. "Hannah, don't," she snapped. "Don't say my name like you still have the right to." He froze at that, his expression flickering with something hurt, maybe, or guilt. "I didn't want you to get dragged into this, you made sure I was." Her voice broke. "You think a contract protects me from being used. You think pretending not to feel anything was enough to keep me safe." He didn't answer. The rain outside grew heavier, streaking down the windows in silver rivers. "Finally," he said, almost in a whisper, "if I tell you the truth, there's no going back." "Then stop lying," she said. "Just once." He took a slow breath, the weight of years pressing into his shoulders. "Your father approached mine 3 years ago. His company was drowning in losses, facing investigation. My family had the resources to bury it, but in exchange, they wanted control. Your father refused to sell outright, so they made a deal, an alliance sealed through marriage. I didn't know the full extent of it until after the wedding. When I did, it was too late." She stared at him, her pulse ringing in her ears. "So, you married me out of obligation, to save the company, to protect your family." He looked at her, the truth heavy in his voice. "No, at first, yes, but later, I stayed because I didn't want to lose you." The words hung there, fragile and trembling like a flame in the wind. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to, but the truth felt like quicksand, every answer dragging her deeper. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the folder until dawn. When the first light touched the curtains, she stood and began to pack. She didn't know where she would go, only that she couldn't stay. By the time Jamin woke, the room was empty. He found a single note on the desk, her handwriting small and deliberate. "Don't look for me. Not until you decide what's worth saving." Outside, the city was waking. Days turned into weeks. Hannah disappeared from public view, her phone disconnected, her family estate shuttered under investigation. Jamin tried to track her down, but every lead vanished like smoke. His board began to circle like vultures, rumors spreading that he'd lost control, that the contract marriage had imploded, that the Han family legacy was finally collapsing. But in the middle of the chaos, something shifted inside him. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of the truth. He started digging into the contracts, the accounts, the buried history between their families. What he found twisted his stomach with dread. The marriage had been a diversion, while the media focused on the glossy headlines. Both companies had quietly funneled money into shell accounts, offshore holdings used to launder funds and hide embezzlement. Hannah's father had orchestrated it, but his own father had agreed to it, signing away morality for the illusion of power. And the last signature in the series, the one that finalized the transfer, was Jamin's. He hadn't realized what he'd signed that day. He'd been told it was a simple renewal clause for the joint venture. But now he understood. He'd been complicit in the crime that destroyed her family. He sat in his study long after midnight, staring at the document, the sound of rain returning once more. Every storm seemed to mirror the state of his heart. He knew what he had to do. The next morning, he called his lawyer. "Prepare the full report," he said. "Everything, no redactions, no cover-ups. I'll face the board myself." The man on the other end hesitated. "Sir, if you do this, the company I know," Jamin interrupted, "let it burn." And so he did. Within a week, the story broke. Leaked financial records, hidden accounts, family scandals laid bare for the world to devour. Reporters camped outside the Han building, cameras flashing like lightning. Jamin gave one statement, calm, precise, devastating. He admitted his role, exposed the corruption, and named every executive involved. His father disowned him the next morning. But through it all, there was no sign of Hannah, until one evening, as the sun bled across the city, he received an email. No subject, no greeting, just a location and a time. An old greenhouse on the edge of the city, midnight. When he arrived, the air inside was heavy with the scent of wilted flowers. The glass panes were fogged, streaked with age. Hannah stood among the overgrown vines, her dress simple, her expression unreadable. "You found me," she said softly. "You wanted me too," he replied. They stood there, surrounded by silence and the faint hum of rain against glass. "I saw what you did," she said. "The confession, the company, your family. You destroyed everything." He nodded. "I had to." "Why?" "Because it was the only way to make it right." Her eyes glistened in the dim light. "There's no right left, Jamin. Only pieces." He stepped closer, careful, as if afraid she'd vanish. "Then let's start with the pieces." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, quietly, she asked, "Do you even know who you are without all of that? Without the name, the power, the walls you hide behind?" He looked around the greenhouse, the dead vines, the cracked soil, the forgotten beauty, and said, almost to himself, "Maybe I don't, but I think I'd like to find out." She looked at him then, truly looked. The rain had softened into a whisper, and through the broken roof, the moonlight touched his face, fragile and human. Something inside her shifted. They sat together on the cold floor, the silence between them no longer sharp, but alive. He told her about the years he'd spent building a life that wasn't his, about the weight of expectation, the loneliness hidden beneath perfection. She listened, not forgiving yet, but understanding in a way she hadn't before. At one point, she reached into her bag and pulled out the folder, the same one that had torn them apart. She placed it between them. "I kept it," she said. "I thought it would remind me of what you took from me, but now I see it's what we both lost." He looked down at the papers, then at her. "What will you do?" "I don't know," she said, "but I'm done letting other people decide for me." The wind pushed through the broken glass, carrying the faint scent of rain and earth. He smiled faintly. "Then maybe we can figure it out together." For the first time, she didn't pull away. They left the greenhouse just before dawn. The city was waking again, soft light spilling over the skyline. As they walked side by side, there was no promise of redemption. No easy ending, only the quiet recognition that what they'd built on lies might still be reborn in truth. But fate, as always, had other plans. 2 days later, as Hannah prepared to meet investigators about the case, she received another message. No name, just one line. "If he takes the fall, you won't survive it either." Attached was a photograph, grainy, taken from a distance. It showed her leaving the greenhouse with Jamin. Someone was watching them. The message came with coordinates, pointing to a private storage facility once owned by her father's company. Against her better judgment, she went alone. The building was silent, its corridors lined with dust and old machinery. She followed the narrow passage until she reached a door marked Archive. Inside were boxes of records, ledgers, receipts, photographs. But on the table in the center of the room lay something new, a sealed envelope addressed to her. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were printed documents, contracts, legal transfers, bearing a new company name she didn't recognize. But the last page made her blood run cold. A recent signature, Hon Jamin. He'd signed something again, something she hadn't known about. She flipped through the papers, scanning the fine print, her eyes catching on one sentence. In the event of dissolution, all assets shall revert to the controlling beneficiary, Sao Hannah. It wasn't a betrayal. It was protection. He'd given everything to her. Before she could react, the faint sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Slow, deliberate. Hannah. A voice called softly. She turned sharply, heart racing, but the room was empty. Only the echo remained. Outside, thunder rolled again, deep and distant. She clutched the documents to her chest, realization dawning like lightning. Jamin hadn't disappeared to escape the fallout. He'd disappeared to save her. And somewhere in the city, under a different sky, he was about to pay a price she never agreed to let him bear alone. The night she found the documents, the air felt charged like the seconds before a storm breaks. The fluorescent light above her flickered, humming faintly, casting long, fractured shadows across the room. Hannah stood still, one hand gripping the edge of the table, her breath uneven. The papers in her other hand were trembling, not from the chill, but from the weight of what they meant. Jamin had transferred everything, every remaining asset, every share, every remnant of his empire to her name. It wasn't a betrayal, it was an offering. The quiet kind made not from guilt, but from love that had nowhere left to go. He was burning the last of his world to keep her untouched by the flames. But where was he now? The thought pressed into her chest like a blade. She glanced toward the dark hallway again. The sound of footsteps had vanished, but the air still carried something electric, like a presence just beyond sight. Slowly she gathered the papers and backed away from the table. The metal door creaked open, her pulse thundering in her ears. Outside, the night was thick and wet. The city lights shimmered through the rain, reflected in puddles along the cracked asphalt. She slipped into her car, slammed the door, and locked it. Her hands trembled as she started the engine. The headlights carved narrow beams through the darkness as she drove away, but the unease didn't fade. It followed her like a shadow sitting in the passenger seat. When she reached home, she found a single envelope slipped under her door. No markings. Inside, just one line written in bold ink. You were never supposed to find him. Her stomach twisted. She turned the paper over blank. But faintly, on the lower corner, a small watermark caught her eye, a company seal. One she recognized from the documents Jamin had once shown her. It wasn't from her father's firm. It was from Han Industries. Someone within his own circle was orchestrating this. Someone who wanted the truth buried deeper than ever before. That night, sleep didn't come. She sat on the balcony, watching the city lights blink in and out like fading stars. Each drop of rain on her skin carried the weight of everything she didn't understand. She remembered the look in Jamin's eyes the last time they spoke, the quiet promise, the exhaustion. He had known something, and he had left to face it alone. Morning came gray and thin. She drove to the old Han headquarters, now crawling with investigators. Cameras flashed as she passed through the gates. Inside, the air smelled of stale paper and metal. Reporters shouted her name, but she didn't stop. She walked straight to the top floor of the CEO's office. Once Jamin, he was almost untouched. His suit jacket still hung behind the chair. The air felt thick with memory, like the ghost of his presence lingered in the space. On his desk she found a small black notebook, half buried under files. The cover was unmarked, the pages filled with neat handwriting, his handwriting. As she turned the pages, a story began to emerge. Dates, meetings, observations, notes that connected names she didn't recognize. At first it looked like a work journal, then the tone shifted. The last few entries were written in haste, lines sharp and uneven. They're closing in. I thought I could end this quietly, but it's bigger than the company. It's all of them. If anything happens, tell her not to trust anyone with the name Han, not even me. Her fingers froze on the page. She flipped to the very end. There, scrawled in ink so dark it bled through, were 3 words. The archive burns. The phrase made no sense at first. Then realization dawned. The archive. The facility she'd just come from. She grabbed her phone and dialed emergency services, but before the operator could answer, a low rumble shuddered through the floor beneath her. The glass windows rattled. In the distance, through the morning haze, she saw a plume of smoke curling up from the industrial district, thick black, growing fast. She didn't think, she ran. By the time she reached the site, flames had already consumed half the building. Firefighters shouted over the roar, hoses hissing as steam rose into the gray sky. The smell of burning plastic and metal stung her throat. She tried to push past the barriers, but an officer grabbed her arm. "Miss, you can't go in there. There are records inside." She shouted. "People might be." "No one's inside," he interrupted, his tone uneasy. "We checked. Whoever started this wanted it empty." The fire raged for hours. By the time it was out, the archive, every trace of what it held was gone. That night, Hannah sat in her car parked on a deserted overlook, watching the city below shimmer like it didn't just swallow the truth whole. She turned on the small recorder app on her phone, her voice barely above a whisper. They burned the evidence, they erased him, but someone wanted me to see it first. Someone's playing both sides. She paused. And if Jamin's alive, he's running from more than his past. Her reflection in the window stared back at her, eyes red, expression hardening. She didn't recognize that version of herself anymore. A sudden buzz from her phone cut through the silence. A new message, no name, no number. This one only said, "Meet me where it began." The words pulled her breath short. The Hahn estate, the place where their contract had been signed. She went. The mansion had been sealed for months, its gardens overgrown, its halls abandoned. The storm had returned, rain trailing down the old windows like tears. She stepped inside. The air was cold, heavy with dust and silence. The lights didn't work, but she knew the way by memory. The ballroom, the altar, the place where she had first said "I do" without meaning it. Now it felt like a tomb. "Jamin." She called softly, no answer, only the echo of her own voice, fading into the dark. She turned to leave and froze. On the grand piano in the corner, a single candle flickered to life. No wind, no sound, just flame. And next to it a photograph. She approached slowly. The photo was of her and Jamin at the charity gala, months ago. They were smiling, genuinely. The first night they'd looked like a real couple. Behind the photograph lay another note. "You're getting too close." Something moved in the hallway behind her, her faint shuffle. She spun around, heart hammering. "Who's there?" Silence. Then, from the shadowed doorway, a voice she hadn't heard in weeks. Low, familiar. Hannah. Jamin stepped into the light. He looked different than her, his eyes hollow but steady. The man she had known was gone, replaced by someone stripped down to survival. His clothes were damp, his hands bandaged. "You shouldn't have come," he said. She stared at him, disbelief and relief crashing into each other. "You're alive. I told you not to find me. They said you were dead. They burned everything I know," he interrupted softly. "That was the point." The candlelight flickered across his face, revealing the bruises along his jaw, the exhaustion behind his calm. "They're watching both of us," he said. "The moment I went public, I became a liability. I signed everything to you so they couldn't touch it. But now you have what they want." "What are they?" she asked. He hesitated. "People who think the Han Empire should never die, even if it means killing everyone tied to it." Thunder cracked above them. The rain intensified, rattling against the old glass. "Then let's go to the police," she said. "Expose the rest of it together." He shook his head. "You don't understand. The evidence is gone. The files, the records, everything's ash. And the moment we move, they'll finish what they started." "Then what's left, Jamin?" she demanded. "What was all of this for?" His expression softened. Pain, resignation, something else. "For you to survive it." She took a step closer, her voice breaking. "I didn't ask you to save me." "I know," he said. "That's why I had to." The silence stretched, filled with the distant sound of rain and the faint hum of the city far below. For the first time, she saw the man not as the heir, or the strategist, or even her husband, but as someone who had spent his life trying to carry the weight of a world built on lies. "I can't let you disappear again," she whispered. He looked at her with something like regret. "You might not have a choice." Lightning flashed through the windows, and in that brief moment of white light, she saw movement outside, figures, indistinct, circling the property. Jamin turned sharply toward the sound. "They found us." He grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the back corridor. "There's a way out through the cellar." They ran through the dark halls, their footsteps echoing off marble and memory. The house groaned under the storm's weight, doors slamming shut as the wind roared. Behind them, the faint sound of boots and whetstone grew louder. They reached the cellar stairs just as a shadow moved across the landing above. Jamin pushed her forward. "Go." She stumbled down, clutching the papers to her chest. He followed, sealing the door behind them. The air below was damp, the walls lined with old wine racks and dust. "Where does it lead?" she whispered. "Through the tunnels out to the garden," he said. But as they turned the corner, she stopped him. "We can't keep running." He looked at her, rainwater dripping from his hair. "We don't have a choice." "Yes, we do," she said, breathless. "We make them come to us." He frowned, confused, until she held up the documents she'd found, the ones naming her as the beneficiary. "They burned the evidence, but they don't know about this yet. If we release it, every eye will turn toward me, toward us. They can't touch what the world is watching for the first time in what felt like forever." She saw something flicker across his face, a glimmer of hope. But before he could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed from the far end of the tunnel. Flashlights cut through the dark. He turned to her, voice low. "You know what to do, Jamin. Go," he said again, his tone final. "This time you have to live for both of us." Her eyes filled, but she didn't argue. She ran. He stayed behind, turning toward the light, his silhouette swallowed by the shadows. Above ground, the rain fell harder, drowning out the shouts below. Hannah burst through the garden gate, clutching the folder to her chest, her heart pounding. Somewhere behind her, the echo of gunfire cracked through the storm. She froze. The world went silent. And for the first time, The question she had feared most took shape in her mind. What if saving her was the only way he knew how to say goodbye? The echo of gunfire hung in the air long after the sound itself had faded. For a moment, time seemed to fracture. Hannah stood motionless under the rain, the cold drops striking her face like tiny shards of glass. Her breath caught in her throat, but she couldn't move. Every instinct screamed to turn back, to run toward the sound, to find him, but her body wouldn't obey. It was as if the world itself had paused, holding its breath with her. Then came the silence, heavy, final. She took a single step backward, her shoes sinking into the wet earth, her fingers tightening around the folder still pressed against her chest. The rain blurred her vision, mixing with tears she didn't remember allowing. The sky above the Han estate pulsed with lightning, washing the garden in flashes of white, then black. Each strike revealed a new shadow, a new uncertainty. "Jamin," she whispered, her voice lost to the storm. She ran. Branches tore at her arms as she stumbled through the garden, her heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. The world around her dissolved into fragments of motion, the crash of thunder, the flash of light, the taste of rain on her lips. She reached the cellar door, flung it open, and froze. The tunnel below was half collapsed, smoke curling through the darkness. The air reeked of gunpowder and burnt wood. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped steadily, echoing like a heartbeat. "Jamin," she cried again. No answer. She stepped forward, coughing as the smoke stung her lungs. The beam of her phone's flashlight cut through the haze, flickering across debris and shattered stone. Then she saw his watch, lying near the steps, the metal face cracked, still ticking faintly. Her knees buckled. She picked it up, pressing it to her chest, the world spinning around her. The folder slipped from her grasp, its pages scattering across the wet floor like broken feathers. Somewhere above, sirens began to wail distant, growing closer. She stumbled out into the open air just as floodlights pierced the storm. A swarm of police vehicles had arrived, their red and blue lights slicing through the night. Officers poured through the gates, shouts cutting through the chaos. Someone took her by the arm, guiding her toward the safety of the vehicles, but all she could do was stare at the burning silhouette of the house behind them. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" a voice asked. She shook her head. Her voice was hollow when it came. "He's still inside." They went in, but she knew somewhere deep in her chest that the man she had loved, the man who had sacrificed everything to shield her, was gone. The days that followed blurred into one another. News broke like wildfire, the mysterious explosion at the Han estate, the rumors of Jamin's death, the speculation that it had all been orchestrated to erase the last remnants of a corporate scandal. Her name was everywhere, photographs of her drenched in rain, headlines calling her the widow of the Han Empire. But she knew the story wasn't over. The documents he'd given her, the ones he'd died to protect, were now in her possession. And though every part of her wanted to grieve, she couldn't ignore what he'd uncovered. There were names buried in those papers, shadow companies and signatures she didn't recognize. The deeper she looked, the more she saw patterns, money trails that extended far beyond their families. Someone had built an empire of corruption on their grief. One night, as she sat in her apartment surrounded by stacks of documents, she found a handwritten note folded between the pages. It wasn't Jamin's handwriting. The paper was newer, the ink too fresh. "He's not gone. But when you find him, you'll wish he had stayed that way." Her blood ran cold. She reread the message again and again. The handwriting was precise, almost clinical, like someone who'd practiced control their whole life. The thought that he might be alive after everything ignited something inside her she couldn't name. Hope, fear, both tangled together. She picked up the phone and called the only person left she could trust, Detective Yoon, the investigator who had once handled her father's case before it was buried. When he arrived, the look in his eyes told her he already knew more than he could say. "You shouldn't have kept those documents," he said quietly. "They're all I have left of him," she replied. "Exactly, which means they're not just your proof, they're your target." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You're not the only one who got that message, Hannah. Someone's been sending similar notes to journalists, investors, even old board members. They all mention the same thing. A facility outside the city, something called Project Meridian." The name felt heavy in her mouth when she repeated it. Meridian. Yoon nodded. "If your husband is alive, that's where you'll find him. But it won't be the man you remember." She didn't sleep that night. She kept seeing flashes of his face, the rain dripping from his hair, the way he'd said, "You might not have a choice." Now she wondered if those words had meant something entirely different. By morning, she had made her decision. The facility sat on the outskirts of the industrial district, hidden behind high walls and the illusion of abandonment. Hannah arrived before dawn, the air cold enough to sting her lungs. The gate was unguarded but newly oiled, used recently. She slipped inside, every sound magnified in the stillness. The corridors were lined with flickering lights, the smell of antiseptic and dust mingling in the air. She followed the signs: Research Wing A, Records Division, Security Control. Every door looked the same, cold and silent. Then she heard a faint mechanical hum, like machinery running deep underground. She followed the sound to a steel elevator at the end of the hall. The button was unmarked. Her finger hovered for a moment before she pressed it. The descent was slow, the walls vibrating faintly. When the doors opened, she stepped into a room that didn't belong in this world. Rows of glass panels lined the walls, each one holding data screens filled with names and numbers. A single figure stood at the center, back turned to her. "Jameen," she whispered. The figure didn't turn immediately. When he did, her breath caught. It was him, but not the man she remembered. His face was thinner, his expression colder. The warmth that had once lived in his eyes was gone, replaced by something hollow, restrained. "Hannah," he said, his voice calm, almost detached. She took a step forward, disbelief flickering in her eyes. "You're alive. I told you not to find me. They said you were dead." "The fire, the gunshots," I thought. He cut her off. "That's exactly what they wanted you to think." She stared at him, confusion breaking through the relief. "Then why didn't you tell me? Why disappear?" He looked past her, toward the rows of glowing screens. "Because I had to finish what we started." "What is this place?" she asked. He hesitated. "It's the core of everything. The records, the hidden accounts, the operations our families built for decades. Project Meridian was designed to erase people's identities, debts, evidence. I thought if I could reach it, I could destroy it. And did you?" He met her gaze. Not yet. There was something else in his tone, something darker, restrained. She stepped closer, searching his face. "What did they do to you, Jameen?" He didn't answer. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint hum of machines. Then softly he said, "They offered me a choice. My life, or yours." Her heart stopped. "And you agreed?" She whispered. "I had to," he said, his voice cracking for the first time. "If I refused, they would have killed you before you ever left the house. The explosion, the gunfire, it was staged. I was supposed to die, and you were supposed to disappear with what they wanted. But when you ran, they changed the plan." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You could have told me. If I did, you would have tried to save me," he said. "And they would have used that against us." For a moment, the air between them felt fragile, like glass stretched too thin. Then she took another step forward, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "So what now? You destroyed all, and what, walk away like none of it happened?" He looked at her then, truly looked, and for the briefest second, she saw the man she had once known, the one who had fixed a broken trellis in the rain, the one who had left coffee on the counter just to make her smile. "No," he said quietly. "I finish this. Then I make sure no one can rebuild it." Before she could respond, a low alarm began to echo through the room, slow, rhythmic, mechanical. The screens around them flickered red. "Security breach," a voice said over the intercom. "Containment in process." Jamin's eyes widened. He turned toward the console. "They found us. What does that mean?" "It means," he said, typing rapidly, "they're sealing the facility." A metal shutter slammed down over the elevator entrance. The hum grew louder. The lights dimmed. Hannah felt her pulse quicken. "Then how do we get out?" He looked at her, calm even as the floor vibrated beneath them. "We don't, not until it's over." He handed her a small flash drive, his fingers brushing hers. "Take this, it's the backup data. If I fail, if they stop me, this is all that's left." "What about you?" she asked, her voice breaking. He smiled faintly, that same tired, gentle smile she'd seen once before in the rain. "If I make it out, I'll find you. But if not." The alarm blared louder. The walls shook. "Go, Hannah," she hesitated, every part of her refusing to move. Then, slowly, she turned toward the emergency corridor as the lights flickered again, casting Jamin in flashes of red and shadow. The last thing she heard before the door sealed shut behind her was his voice, steady, certain, and heartbreakingly final. "I'll finish what we started." And as the darkness closed in, Hannah realized that for the first time, she wasn't running from the past anymore. She was running toward the truth, whatever it cost. But deep down, in that narrow corridor lit by the pulse of alarms, one thought haunted her with every step. If Jamin was fighting to end it, then who had been pulling the strings all along? The corridor shook beneath Hannah's feet as the alarms rose into a violent crescendo. The red lights pulsed like a heartbeat, erratic, desperate. She could hear the low groan of steel grinding against steel, the walls sealing behind her, layer by layer, trapping everything and everyone below. Jamin was gone again, but this time she wasn't powerless. The flash drive burned against her palm, small but impossibly heavy. Every echo down the narrow passage carried the memory of his voice. "I'll finish what we started." She burst through the end of the corridor, slamming her shoulder into a metal door until it gave way. The air outside was sharp, cold, thick with smoke and static. Above her, dawn had begun to stain the horizon, a thin blade of gold cutting through the gray. The facility loomed behind her, vast, silent, alive in its death throes. For a moment, she turned back, the outline of the structure dissolving into the morning mist. Beneath it, somewhere, was the man she had once loved, and the truth he had given everything to uncover. But now she held the only piece that mattered, and the only thing that might destroy the people who had built all of this. She didn't notice the car until it stopped a few meters ahead. The door opened slowly. Detective Yoon stepped out, his expression unreadable beneath the flickering light of the facility's alarms. "You found him," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Hannah nodded once. Yoon's eyes fell to the drive in her hand. "That's it, isn't it? It's everything," she whispered. He took a step closer, his tone softening. Then you need to give it to me. You're not safe anymore. The way he said it, too rehearsed, too certain, made her hesitate. Her grip on the flash drive tightened. You already knew where I was going. He didn't answer. You knew about Meridian before anyone else, she continued, her voice rising. Before I told you, before the news broke, you knew. The silence between them cracked like ice. Yoon's gaze shifted, not with guilt, but with something colder. Calculation. Hannah, he said, almost gently, you were never supposed to find him. Her stomach dropped. He was supposed to stay dead. That was the deal. The words struck like a blade, not fast, but deliberate. The meaning unfolded in her chest, sharp and unbearable. You worked for them, she breathed. For survival, Yoon said, stepping closer. The same reason Jaemin did. You think he went underground because he wanted to be a hero? No, he made a trade, his silence, for your life. But you ruined it when you started digging. The world seemed to narrow. The sound of the alarms faded until there was only his voice, low and steady, slicing through her disbelief. I told them I could contain it, he said, that if you found anything, I'd take care of it. But you never stop, do you? Hannah's voice trembled. You were his friend. Yoon's face softened for a fleeting second, a flicker of regret, or maybe recognition. He was a good man, and that's why I didn't stop him sooner. He extended his hand. Give me the drive. Hannah let this end something in her stilled the storm that had raged inside her since the moment their contract began. The years of control and silence, the grief and deception, it all settled into clarity. She saw it now, the true architecture of their lives. Every clause, every rule, every condition in that marriage had been designed to control not love, but legacy. To bind to bloodlines and erase anyone who tried to break free. No, she said quietly. Yoon's expression didn't change, but the faint movement of his right hand, the way it brushed against his jacket, told her everything. Her voice dropped to a whisper. If you pull that trigger, you'll destroy the only proof that could save you too. For a second, their eyes locked, a silent war between duty and desperation. Then, from deep within the facility, a sound thundered upward, a low, shuddering rumble that rolled through the ground like an earthquake. The air itself trembled. Yoon turned instinctively toward the noise. That was all she needed. Hannah ran. She sprinted toward the outer gates, the world shaking around her. Behind her, the facility began to collapse in on itself. A controlled implosion. Fire tore through the windows, swallowing metal and glass in a blinding wave of heat. The shock wave threw her to the ground. When she opened her eyes, the sky was raining ash. She could hear nothing but the ringing in her ears. Her breath ragged, the flash drive still clenched in her hand. Somewhere behind her, Yoon was shouting her name, but she didn't turn. She crawled to her feet, staggered toward the main road. The morning light was cold now, pale against the destruction. Every part of her wanted to stop, to let the exhaustion pull her under. But then she remembered Jaemin's words. If I make it out, I'll find you. She didn't know if he had survived, but the fire had burned to clean, too perfectly timed. Someone had triggered the collapse from inside. Maybe it was him. Hours later, in the anonymity of a motel room far from the city, she finally looked at the flash drive. It was small, unassuming. She plugged it into a laptop. The screen flickered to life, lines of code, encrypted files, data logs, and then a folder, labeled in Jaemin's handwriting. For her hand shook as she opened it. Inside were video recordings, dozens of them. The first opened automatically. Jaemin's face filled the screen, tired, unshaven, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. If you're watching this, he began, his voice soft, it means I didn't make it out. Hannah's breath hitched. He looked straight into the camera. I didn't lie to you. Not about what we were, or what we became. I just wanted you to live. Everything I did, the contract, the secrecy, it was all to buy you time. You were never supposed to be part of this war, Hannah. But they underestimated you. They always did. He paused, his gaze lowering. I found the truth. Meridian wasn't just about erasing data. It was about rewriting it. Every record, every death, every name rewritten to protect the powerful. Your father was the first they used it on. The words hit her like ice. He continued. Your father discovered the project before it was finished. He tried to stop it. So they erased him not just from the company, but from history. The files you found, the ones on this drive, they're the only uncorrupted records left. If you release them, the system collapses. He leaned closer to the lens. But if you do, they'll come for you, and they won't stop this time. The screen went black for a moment. Then another video loaded. Shorter, quieter. In it, Jaemin sat by a window, the light fading behind him. I thought love was a distraction, he said. Something weak. But it was the only thing that ever made me want to be more than what they created. You taught me that. He smiled faintly, almost shy. If I couldn't live to see it end, at least I knew you would. The recording cut off. For a long time, Hannah didn't move. The hum of the cheap motel refrigerator was the only sound in the room. Outside, the world carried on, cars passing, life resuming, unaware that everything was about to change. She copied the files, uploaded them to multiple secure servers. Each click felt like setting fire to another lie. By the time the first leak hit the media that night, she was already gone. The headlines exploded. Corruption scandal exposed in Han conglomerate network. Meridian project linked to political manipulation. Key evidence leaked from unknown source. The empire began to crumble. Names once untouchable were dragged into daylight. Accounts frozen. Trials announced. The world shifted. But for Hannah, it wasn't victory. It was silence. Days turned into weeks. She moved from city to city, watching from a distance as the machine her family had built began to consume itself. Each report, each arrest, felt like justice and grief intertwined. Then, one night, she received an email. No sender, no subject, just a single line of text. Look outside. Her heart froze. She stood, walked slowly to the window. Across the street, in the dim glow of a street lamp, stood a figure. The same posture, the same tilt of the head. Jamin, he looked thinner, his hair longer, but it was him, alive. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The distance between them seemed to stretch forever, filled with all the words left unsaid, all the moments lost to time and sacrifice. Then, slowly, he smiled. It wasn't a grand gesture, or a promise. Just quiet recognition that somehow, against all the odds, they had both survived the fire that was meant to destroy them. The light changed. He turned, disappearing into the crowd. She didn't follow. She didn't need to. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, soft and silent, covering the city in a thin white veil. Hannah stood there, watching it drift past the glass, her breath fogging the window. For the first time in years, she felt the air fill her lungs without the weight of fear or expectation. Their marriage had begun as a transaction, bound by cold signatures and cruel conditions. But what had grown from it, the love, the loss, the rebellion, had become something untouchable. And as the snow thickened, she whispered to the night, her voice barely a breath. Some contracts are written in ink, others in fire, and somewhere, perhaps not so far away, a man in the shadows whispered back, words carried by the wind, words she would never hear, but somehow already knew. I kept my promise. Snow continued to fall long after the street lamps dimmed, coating the city in silence. The chaos that once ruled Hannah's life had dissolved into quiet, leaving behind only the hum of passing cars and the distant rhythm of footsteps. She remained by the window, her reflection soft against the glass, watching the world turn pale beneath the winter sky. Somewhere beyond that horizon, he was still moving, not gone, but out of reach, as he had always been. Yet this time the ache felt different. It was no longer hollow. It was whole, like the echo of a song that had finally found its ending. Days turned into weeks, and the story that had consumed the world began to fade from the headlines. The once mighty conglomerates folded under the weight of their own secrets. Names whispered in boardrooms now filled court documents. The Meridian project was dismantled piece by piece, its files made public, its architects forced into the same light they had feared. But Hannah stayed far from it all. She didn't attend the trials. She didn't give interviews. She let the storm of consequences pass over her like distant thunder. What mattered had already been done, the truth had been freed, and with it, the ghost of a past. She rented a small house on the edge of the coast, where the air smelled of salt and the horizon stretched endlessly. There was nothing left of the woman who had once signed her life away under the flicker of chandeliers and the weight of a family's name. The mansion was gone, the contracts dissolved, the empire turned to ash. What remained was the woman who had walked through fire and learned that love, even when bound by rules, had the power to unmake the rules themselves. Every morning she walked along the cliffs, watching the waves break against the rocks below. The sea had its own kind of honesty, relentless, endless, refusing to be tamed. She often thought of Jamin then, and the life they had shared in fragments, the first awkward smiles, the nights when neither could sleep, the sound of rain against the glass, when they still believed distance could protect them. She remembered the last time she saw him beneath the streetlight, his smile faint but alive. She didn't chase him, not because she didn't want to, but because she understood now that some stories end not with reunion, but with understanding. Sometimes she imagined him somewhere far away, walking the same coastline from the other side of the world. Perhaps he still carried the scars of their past, or perhaps he had let them fade. Maybe he had built something new, something quiet, free of ghosts. The thought didn't hurt her. It comforted her. The idea that survival didn't have to mean forgetting. One evening, as the sun sank into the horizon, she sat by the water and opened the last file left on the flash drive. It was one she hadn't dared to touch before, a document labeled the agreement. At first, she thought it was the original contract, the one that had bound their names together. But it wasn't. The pages were handwritten, dated the week before everything fell apart. The first line made her breath catch. A marriage without love is a prison, but a marriage born from sacrifice, that's something else entirely. It was Jamin's handwriting. The pages weren't legal documents. They were letters, his reflections, his thoughts, written as if he knew she would find them long after he was gone. He wrote about the first time he realized he cared for her, about the moments he tried to hide it beneath indifference. He wrote about fear, not of death, but of her seeing the truth too soon. I thought I could protect you by keeping you away, one line read, but you walked toward the fire when I couldn't. Maybe that's what love really is, not saving each other, but burning together until the truth stands clean. By the time she finished reading, the sun had vanished completely, leaving only the rhythmic crash of waves and the faint shimmer of stars above the dark water. She folded the papers carefully, feeling their edges soften in her hands. Then she stood, letting the wind carry the salt against her skin, and whispered a name that had become both a wound and a prayer. The years that followed moved gently, unhurried. The world forgot their story, as the world always does. New scandals rose, new names filled the airwaves, and the city rebuilt itself from its fractures. But beneath that noise, somewhere deep and unrecorded, the quiet legacy of their choices remained. People spoke of the Meridian leak as the beginning of a new transparency, of systems rebuilt with integrity. But no one knew whose hands had set the truth free. Hannah never claimed it. She didn't need to. Her reward was not recognition, but release. Sometimes, when the tide was low, she would walk barefoot along the shore, collecting small pieces of glass polished smooth by the sea. She kept them in a jar by her window, fragments once broken, now made beautiful by time and motion. It reminded her of them, of what they had been. One night, during a storm that rolled in from the north, a knock echoed against her door. She opened it to find an envelope on the step, soaked but intact. Inside was a photograph, grainy, taken from a distance, a marketplace somewhere foreign, vibrant with color and noise. Among the crowd, blurred but unmistakable, was Jamin. His face was half turned, eyes hidden, but his hand rested on the counter of a fruit stall, and beside him was a small girl, laughing, her hand gripping his sleeve. No words, no explanation, just that one image. Hannah stood for a long time, the storm roaring behind her. She felt the ache rise again, gentle this time, not pain, but gratitude. He was alive, and he had found something worth living for. Maybe that was the truest ending they could ever have. She placed the photograph by the jar of sea glass and sat down by the window, watching the rain sweep across the cliffs. The ocean was violent tonight, but its violence no longer frightened her. It was only a reminder that beauty and chaos often shared the same tide. As the hours passed, the storm softened, leaving the world washed clean. The sky opened, the moonlight spilling across the wet earth, silver and endless. Hannah closed her eyes and breathed deeply, her pulse slow, her body weightless. She could almost hear him in the wind, his voice carried across the waves, soft, unhurried, unbound. And in that sound, she realized something she had never dared to before. Their story had never been about survival. It had been about transformation. Two people forged in duty, stripped of choice, had learned painfully, beautifully, that love was not obedience or sacrifice, but the courage to see the other as free. When morning came, she walked out to the edge of the cliff once more. The sea below shimmered like glass. She opened her hand, revealing one small piece of the sea-polished glass from the jar, once sharp, now harmless. She held it up to the light, watching it catch the sun, then let it fall. It disappeared soundlessly into the waves. She smiled. Life, she thought, was not about what was kept, but what was released. And somewhere, in the quiet that followed, her heart whispered one final truth, not to him, but to herself. We began as a contract. We became a promise. The wind carried it away, scattering her words into the horizon. The tide rolled in, and the world moved forward, calm, certain, infinite. And as the camera of this imagined film pulled slowly away from her standing at the cliff's edge, the ocean stretching wide before her, her figure growing smaller against the immensity of light, a voice, perhaps hers, perhaps his, lingered softly like the echo of a memory. What does it mean to love in a world built on conditions? Perhaps it is simply to stay human, even when everything else demands you become something less. The sea answered with a single, endless breath, and the screen faded to white.